Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Lebanon City Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for Monday, August the 6th, 2018. We have well, we need to take roll first, I guess, don't we?
Yeah.
That'd be handy.
Okay. Gordon Perry?
Here.
Bruce Pauley?
Here.
Ron Edwards?
Here.
Chad Kiger?
Here.
Lori Gross?
Here.
Okay, we do have a full quorum tonight. We have minutes from last month. Has everybody had a chance to look at them? Any questions or concerns on them?
Make a motion to approve them.
Second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve them. All in favor, just say aye.
Aye.
Okay, they've been approved. Okay, we've got two items tonight on the agenda. This is a public meeting, so during each of the dockets, there will be time to hear from the audience if anybody wants to speak. The only thing is we need everybody or whoever's going to speak to sign in on this paper over here now or before you speak, if you could. Okay. Get my paperwork squared around. Okay, our first item on the docket is number 18-31. It's Chris Edwards is requesting a variance to construct a multifamily housing. The property is located at the following addresses. They are 224 South Meridian Street, 304 South Meridian Street, and 310 South Meridian Street, and 320 South Meridian Street, all in Lebanon. The variances are, well, let's go back. The history is, this is the first time that this has been before the zoning board. And subject properties are currently including 3 houses that are maintained as multi-unit rentals and vacant land. Ken, you want to start us out?
Good evening, board members. Maybe before I get into this item, since the first two on the agenda were noticed, I want to make sure in case anybody was here for those items that they know why we're not discussing them. So docket 1829 was a request by Renee Howe for variance to allow an above ground swimming pool in the front yard. That item has been withdrawn by the applicant, so that will not be heard tonight. Docket 18-30, Tom Land requesting use variance to construct multifamily residential on vacant parcels on Superior Street, and that item has been continued to the September meeting. So if anybody was here for one of those two items, the first was withdrawn, and then the second one will be continued to the September meeting. Now moving on to docket 1831, Mr. Edwards' proposal to construct, it's actually a mixed use.
It will be September the 4th.
I'm sorry.
No, this would be the notice. Yeah, this is the notice. So are you from Mr. Land's application? Yes. It will be at the September 4th meeting, which is actually on a Tuesday evening.
Tuesday because of Labor Day being the Monday.
So it'll be that Tuesday, September 4th at 7 p.m.
Thank you.
Okay. This is Mr. Edwards' project for the Big Four Crossing development. This is currently proposed as 2 mixed-use multi-story buildings. Each one having first floor retail that's around 7,000 square feet, 2 tenant units, and then second and third floor apartments. I believe if my recollection is correct, there's 14 units of apartments total on the upper floors in each of the 2 buildings. The applicant will walk through their project in a little more detail, but they're going to construct this in 2 phases. The first phase would be the structure that's on the far south part of the property. If they can pull the site plan up, I can kind of walk you through that on the site plan on the computer here. All right, this is the corner of Superior Meridian Street. You see here the building sits in kind of this U shape right here on the south part of the property. The front of the building faces Superior Street, which is just catty corner from us here in this building. There is associated parking, including handicap parking to the north of and behind the building, before you get to what is currently the alley that will remain an alley. As you're going north, let me scroll up here. Also in phase one, this far north site, which is parking, would be constructed as well in order to make sure that they meet the parking requirements for the overall project. Once this portion of the project gets underway and is completed later this year, towards the end of the year, then the phase two building would be under construction, finished early next year, which would be this second building here, where there currently sit 2 homes. This would be facing Meridian Street with associated parking to the rear. They have, with the parking that's associated with the 2 buildings and the standalone parking lot, they do more than meet our parking requirements for the central business district and for these types of uses. We have calculated those and they do meet those. Walking through some of the variance requests that are taking place as part of this. The first one is residential street trees. Along every street, they're required to plant a shade tree between the sidewalk and the street every 45 feet. The challenge on this site is that it's also the location of the Big 4 trail. It runs along Meridian Street. So when you're going from a 5 to 6 foot sidewalk to a 10-foot path, the landscape strip between the sidewalk and the street gets much smaller. In this case, I believe it's only 3 feet or even less than 3 feet between the sidewalk and the street, which is not sufficiently sized to plant a tree unless you want it to tear up your concrete over time. So they're requesting a waiver of that requirement, a relief from that requirement for the street tree requirements. Also keep in mind, in the central business district, we permit buildings to have a 0 setback along the front setback. So the building will be right up on the sidewalk and there will be limited space between the sidewalk and the street. So there really is no place to plant street trees in this specific instance. And this is because of something the city is imposing rather than something that the applicant is requesting. So because we're installing the trail on the street, there's not room for street trees. So it's based on the city's requirement. The second would be parking area setbacks. And this is associated with this far north parking lot. As you can see here, again, the primary goal as we developed the site plan with the applicant was to meet the parking space requirements. In order to do that, and this is a fairly limited width on this parking lot, they have, rather than doing 90-degree parking spaces, they went to angle parking, which allows you to minimize some of the width necessary in a parking lot, but even at that, they're unable to meet the setbacks on the side property lines. And it's not showing up on my screen very well, but I believe, yeah, it's right around 3 foot rather than 5 foot setbacks on the north and south property line. In addition, there would require a 10-foot setback along this front property line adjacent to Meridian Street, and right now they're showing about 2 to 3 feet in the front too. Again, this is more about making sure we met the parking space requirements, which I thought was very critical in this case, being in a downtown location. Given the fact that buildings are permitted a 0 setback, and parking is required a 10-foot setback. We kind of met in the middle with them and made sure we met the parking space requirements. But that did mean that there's only a 2-foot setback along Meridian Street. So they're requesting relief from the parking area setbacks for that lot in order to be 2 to 3 feet from the front and side property lines. Variance request number 3 is related to that same parking setback. Parking lot perimeter landscaping, UDO would require them to maintain a 5-foot perimeter landscape area planted with 3 trees and 10 shrubs every 100 feet. Given that their parking setback that they're proposing is only 2 to 3 feet, they don't have the 5-foot required perimeter landscape area. And also, given the fact that it's only 3 feet wide, it's very challenging to plant trees in that same area. So they have proposed to meet the shrub requirement on the north and south property lines of that parking lot. But they won't be installing the trees, and that's mainly due to the fact there's just not enough room for it. So those are the 3 variances. Outside of those 3, the site and development does meet all of our applicable standards. It is currently going through development plan review with all of our departments and through drainage review, so they will meet all of those applicable standards. Again, just to reiterate, they have more than met the parking requirement for the central business district for this type of use. I will show you before I close my comments, I do have in here, if I can find it quickly, what this project will look like. It's not quite the final elevation. but it'll give you, actually, before I do that, here's a landscape plan. Whoops, a little too far. So you can see on this north parking lot, they are showing some trees being planted in to the front and rear of the parking area, and they're showing the shrub requirement being met along the perimeter as well. They are showing some perimeter parking lot landscaping for both of the parking areas, and you can actually see here, this is showing underground detention under the parking lot so they can meet our stormwater drainage requirements. But they do have trees and shrubs along the perimeter of the parking lot per the ordinance requirements here on the building.
But there are virtually no shrubs along Meridian Street other than right on the south building?
There were, in the parking area, the parking perimeter did have shrubs along Meridian Street. If they go back to that site.
I guess the middle building has nothing.
In front of no, because the building is right on the sidewalk. It has a 0 setback, so we don't require landscaping in front of the building because we permit a 0 setback. So there is no room. This is like a building on the square. It's right on the sidewalk. So as you can see, along this parking, they're showing trees and shrubs along the front. And where the parking on the far south building is adjacent to the street, they're showing a setback that has trees and shrubs in this area as well. And this is showing some of the utilities, so they're not planting over top of the utilities there, which would cause issues with those utility placements, but they are meeting the tree and shrub requirement for the parking. And then I will scroll down to one of the last, here we go. So this is representative of what the front elevation will look like. It's got a very urban downtown feel to the building with storefronts you see on the first floor. You can see there's 2 store frontages. It theoretically could be 4, most likely it'll probably be two units. They're expecting to market this to small retail shops and small offices. For the building on Superior, it has a little bit more visibility from Lebanon Street. There's a possibility it could be like a small ice cream or coffee shop or something like that. I would expect, because it's not right on the primary route, that you're more likely going to see like an insurance agent office or something like that in these smaller spaces that's sized appropriately for something like that. So we're not necessarily seeing high traffic retail in these locations, since if it was on Lebanon Street, it'd be entirely different because it's on a less traffic street. You're going to see something that's lower intensity retail. Because it is on the trail route, as that trail becomes more popular and we start making all the connections through town, you see more pedestrian traffic. It's possible you might see some retail associated with the pedestrian traffic with the trail. So this gives you a little bit of an idea. It has changed a little bit from this rendering. As it went through the Historic Preservation Commission, it has received approval for the architecture of the project. It did get amended slightly from this, but this is a good representative sample of what this project will look like. Kind of gives you an idea what the sides and the rear of the building look like. This does meet all the applicable UDO standards for architecture and has been through the HPC and received HPC's approval as well.
For residential or commercial standards?
For both.
What about parking for the residents? Are they going to have that so they can park in a designated spot, or?
I don't know how they're going to implement the parking, but they have met our parking requirements. So I ran a calculation on number of spaces for both retail and residential combined, and they're actually a handful of spaces above that minimum requirement with what they've shown here.
What is the minimum requirement?
I'd have to go back to my notes. I didn't bring it with me, but I did run the calculations based on what the UDO. For the commercial retail, it's 1 space for 250 square feet. And then depending on how many bedrooms there are, I did see it's either a 1 bedroom requires 1.5 parking space, and everything more than that requires 2. Keep in mind though, in the central business district, it does allow a 50% reduction of the total requirement due to the fact that there's on-street parking that's also available in the area.
These are 3 separate parcels, correct?
It is actually right now 5 separate parcels.
Okay.
And they'll be doing a primary plat to combine those as part of this process as well.
And one of those is parking only.
Yes.
Ben, do we have to be concerned with the way that parking is handled, or how do we concern ourselves? Let me phrase it that way. How do we concern ourselves with parking that's going to be developed, and then at the time that something gets built, it becomes an additional fee to a tenant, and then all of a sudden we have all this street parking?
We have no way to regulate whether they charge for parking or not.
Because that has created a pretty substantial issue on North Meridian Street.
Yeah, we can't, they can charge, I mean, somebody did obviously different market in downtown Indianapolis, most everybody pays for their parking, but all our requirements say is they have to make parking available associated with the development per our standards. If they charge for parking, that's not something I can or can't regulate.
But they cannot charge on Meridian Street, right?
They cannot charge, oh, you mean on the street? No.
Public street, no.
And so, and those are public parking spaces, anybody can, I mean, it's publicly available. So if all those residents choose to park out there in a designated space on the street, they can do that as well.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Ben, does the UDO allow for off-site parking to satisfy their requirements?
It does. There's a provision within a certain distance of a site
Okay.
That allows for that.
Did they meet the standards anyway if they weren't using that off-site parcel?
If that parking wasn't available, no, it would not meet our parking requirements without that. So their intention actually was to do an additional building up there and reduce the parking further, and we said it's more important to meet your parking requirements. Clearly, that's not going to generate any revenue for them to have a parking lot there.
So the charge.
Again, I don't know what the intention is, and I can't require them to do it one way or the other.
Okay. Any other questions for Ben?
Sidewalks are all going to stay?
Yeah, sidewalks will actually be improved. We're going to replace on Meridian Street. We're going to replace the existing quote-unquote sidewalk, which is in significant disrepair, with a 10-foot wide path. It will become the route for the Big Four Trail. Once we finish it from Patterson Street to downtown, it will turn the corner on Meridian, run right past this property. So we'll be installing this segment as part of this project.
Thank you.
We're actually going to repair curbs too. Some of the curbs are in pretty bad shape along Meridian as well, so those will be repaired as well as part of this project.
A question that it pertains to this, but doesn't. Why is the trail not being put in asphalt? Is there a reason for that? You're doing concrete versus asphalt.
The durability issue. Concrete lasts longer. It's only incrementally more expensive than asphalt to install, and it lasts quite a bit longer.
Okay. Any other questions? Would the applicant care to step forward and address the board with some information?
How you guys doing tonight?
Good.
Good. My name is Nick North. I'm representing Chris Edwards. I'm the local builder here in town that will be facilitating with the project through all the stages, phase 1, 2, and 3. I don't live locally, but I soon will be. My address is 4149 Wirethrush Drive, Indianapolis, Indiana. So on this project here, we've been working in tail with all the parties in the city utilities, the town on ways how we can try to bring new living, new higher standing living to the area, but still meet most of the requirements at hand. As you'll see in the variances that we did supply for are very minimal. I know we're talking about parking. That was one of the questions Mr. Perry had talked about if we're looking at charging. Well, with us being able to meet the requirements we're at with the tenant spaces in there, Ben was on it with about 14 spaces per building. So being able to have the spaces adequate for the tenants in there, they will have first right, will have a little tag in their vehicle. So making sure that the space is not public, but it will be for the people in the space. Now, based on what we've kind of been in talks with what businesses go in there, based on what we need to do for after hours times or this and that, that's something that we are diligently looking ahead for in time with tenant spaces. But on the spaces, though, available, with making sure that the tenants that will be in the space will have adequate parking for them. So, anything questions that you guys may have?
This is going to be retails in the bottom?
We're open to anything. We've talked about some type of retail, whether it be a restaurant or it be a clothing store, or as Ben was alluding to, as in a coffee shop. We're really open to anything. We're making sure that we have enough GPM for our water flow, enough power that's adequate for the space. So if there is a client that needs, say, the whole space or half, or we can break it up into 4, we can be adequate for what business that comes in to want to take part.
Would there be hours set that not going to interfere with what's going on upstairs, the residents?
We have talked about that. Most retail businesses close prior to 11 o'clock, so of course we're not going to entertain any bars or anything like that that would exceed, after hours times that would be something that would be impervious to the people upstairs. So most restaurants that are timed normally that 10, 11 o'clock, so that's pretty much the latest that we would have business in there that would be operating kind of into the later hours. So, but definitely staying away from the after hours type of businesses for sure. Yes.
On the rear alley, rear street, is that going to all be reworked, redone, or are you going to keep what's there existing?
Okay, so.
Go ahead, or I can address that.
Okay, I'll let Ben address because there's been some changes and stuff going on with that.
Yeah, all of the infrastructure around the site will be completely redone as part of this. So sidewalk, curb, and all the alley repaving. In fact, right now, it's probably maybe 10 feet wide, if that. The alley right-of-way is about 16 feet, so we're going to maximize the width to 16 feet. And then also make sure the turns, you've got the alley coming in and off of Meridian, and then you got the north-south alley where it tees together. We're going to make sure that the radius of the turns where those two meet is adequate for a fire truck, so they've increased those radius to, I think it's 20 feet now, to make sure the fire trucks can make that turn and get down that alley. So we are definitely making some improvements, so it's a little bit safer to get in and around that site. And we're also evaluating whether those become one-way alleys rather than two-way, since it's not a full two-way width, and how we work that around the site as well. So we're definitely making those improvements. They'll all be completely redone by the time this project's done.
And looking at C 2.0, and on the south end in the alley, am I seeing vehicles? Is that parking?
Let me go find him. So if I recall from what you're probably looking at, I'll find the page so I know for sure. They've left open flexibility for there to be a drive-through on that side of the building. So it's not parking, they're just showing stacking for a drive-through window. Again, they're not anticipating a use there. They just want to have the flexibility in that case to do that.
But it's not going to be parking spaces.
It is not parking. That they're just showing stacking space for the drive-through window, but it
Okay.
is not parking in the alley.
Great. You got anything else?
Is our existing infrastructure adequate enough to stormwater or sewer?
Yeah,
adequate enough to support that many?
The water is just a simple tie-in. It's got water all the way around the site. The sanitary sewer runs down the alley. There's an extremely old manhole that's right behind that property that needs to be replaced. And then we're evaluating now whether we'll be able to just line the line that heads to the north and it actually goes under CVS, ironically. Our sanitary line goes directly under the building. So there's a segment there from just south of CVS down to the southern end of this property that we're evaluating whether it can be lined or whether it have to be replaced. But it is going to be either lined or replaced as part of this project. Stormwater, there are adequate stormwater utilities, and as I mentioned, they're going to have to do some on-site detention. They can't, because there is some grass that's out there now, so they are increasing impervious surface. So it is being evaluated by our consultant to make sure they meet all our stormwater requirements, but they are proposing some underground, under the parking lot detention before it empties into our stormwater system to make sure that they're not creating any larger burden on the system than what already exists on the site.
Thanks.
Is this building going to be sprinkled?
Yes.
There's curb division and landscaping between their north property line for their parking and the CVS parking lot, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Ben.
Any other questions for Ben or the applicant?
Ben, don't we have an all brick requirement?
We do not.
We don't?
No.
That's up to a certain height?
Right, I think there's a percentage requirement.
Yeah.
Is that gonna be vinyl on there, or is it gonna be
It's hardy, it's a hardy, a cement board
hardy
product.
board, cement
Yeah.
board?
No other questions? Okay, this is a public meeting. Anybody from the audience care to address?
I haven't signed in yet, but I will.
Well, just before you leave, that's all that counts. We know where to find you.
I'm Troy Whitaker. I own the business at 104 East Superior. And as we're talking about, my only concern is parking is a premium right now, and I can see the residents living in the far south building wanting to park closer to the building rather than walk to the parking lot. Oh, is it gonna be okay to park on this side? In other words, up against your curb around this building? Let's say on Superior Street.
South side of Superior Street?
South side of Superior Street. We've been told we're not allowed to do that, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, I don't think that the Superior Street is wide enough to have parking on both sides. They would likely have some designated spaces on, I say designated, marked spaces on the north side of Superior, but it's not, I don't think it's wide enough to do.
North side?
Yes,
I'm sorry,
yes.
I'm saying east
Down
of
your
Meridian,
way?
East of Meridian.
I don't know that there's any room to put parking spaces there, because you've got curb and building right up close. I don't even know there's any space to do. I mean, we'll have to look at it, but I don't know there's any space
Well,
to
there's
do.
no, as far as we can tell, there's nothing saying we can't, other than we've been told by
Right.
the street
I-
department that we weren't supposed to.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any space for it as you go east from Meridian. I'm thinking west from Meridian on their side of Meridian, there would be marked spaces on Superior, but
As you go down Superior, there's parking on both sides now, other than right here by your building. I'm just asking if we'll be able to park across from us, next to your property
we'll,
here.
we'll have to take a look at it. I'm not sure.
There's nothing out there now that says you can't park on the east side of Superior, right here
Yeah,
at the building.
I don't know that it's been designated as no
No,
parking.
no, there isn't anything there right now.
I'm just
So-
worried about employees and,
Yeah, what we'll have to do is go out there and evaluate where on-street parking is permissible, physically permissible, and we'll have to mark the street for parking and make sure that in places where it's not permissible physically, that we mark it as no parking.
Can we,
Go ahead.
can we make, I guess, Ben, this your homework assignment to kind of follow up on that and get back to Troy?
Oh, yeah, yep, Troy and I are in communication pretty regularly.
Okay,
yeah, and it's also a thing for my customers if they have a place to stop and park. They do it sometimes. We tell people, don't, but you can't tell all of them. We can't stand out there and say, no, come over here,
Yeah, well, I'll definitely work with Troy and make sure where there are limitations, we make sure those are clear. Keep in mind also, anywhere where we put no parking signs, that's regulated by city code. So we'd have to go through a process to go to council and get an ordinance amendment in order to amend the city code for no parking. But we will definitely take a look if there's, again, physically there's not room, we'll definitely make sure that there's no parking signs put up. And then where it is permissible, we'll mark spaces so it's clear where they can and can't park.
okay, thank you.
That was basically it. I'm just looking for parking. We also get trucks on that street. And I don't know, hopefully that won't be a problem. Normally our trucks are early in the morning, but sometimes you never know. I mean, I'll be glad to work with them however we can. I just don't want to run into issues later. But we can figure that out.
Okay,
That was it.
okay, thank you. Anybody else care to address?
Okay, if all this goes as planned,
Name and address,
My
please.
name's Bridget Duran. I live at 311 South Meridian Street, which is right across the road from where they're planning to build. I've noticed with my kid being special needs, he gets the bus right outside of his door. But I've also noticed that right up at the stop sign, everybody runs that stop sign. Are they gonna put a stoplight in if there's more traffic that's going through so there's not a major amount of accidents there?
I think that's probably something that needs to be addressed with the police department or the street department or another agency other than Board of Zoning, probably.
Because, I mean, if they're gonna have like a lot of people, it's gonna just, people run these stoplights all through here. I've seen them numerously. And I worry about that if it's gonna be extra traffic of whether they're gonna actually put a stoplight between here and the municipal building and the other street so that there's not major concerns with people running that stop sign.
I have no idea. I would guess, and it's strictly my guessing, that there would not be a stoplight. Could be a stop sign, but
Because we've got a stop sign now and they
that's
constantly.
probably something you need to go to the mayor, or Ben, who would she go to?
Let's get you the public hearing, and I can address some of the comments.
Okay.
Okay.
That it for you?
Thank you.
Anybody else care to address the board? Okay, we will close the public portion of the hearing.
Just to generally address those comments, while there will be incrementally more traffic that's caused by this, my anticipation, and we haven't even had this discussion, but my anticipation is that the level of traffic wouldn't warrant a traffic signal. In terms of determining where to put traffic signal, it's more about the volume of traffic. And I don't anticipate that the increase in traffic would warrant a traffic signal. We can take a look to see, make sure that the stop signs are visible and make sure they remain visible, or make sure they're more visible. It's more of a safety thing, but we can't stop people from running stop lights just as much as they run stop signs too. But yeah, we can definitely take a look to see if we can increase the visibility of the stop signs to hopefully help that. But my guess is that the increase in traffic wouldn't warrant a stoplight.
Thank you. Any questions for Ben, or any discussion, I guess?
I have a
amongst the board?
question. Did the applicant have a copy of the UDO prior to designing
Yes.
the plat?
Yeah, in fact, we negotiated with them to get to this point on the
So
site.
most of these variances require or are associated with distance setbacks.
Right.
What I want to know is why couldn't the property be designed to meet the Unified Development Ordinance?
So the biggest challenge was we could either meet the setbacks or we could get the required number of parking spaces. So the city felt it was more important to get the required number of parking spaces and make it fit as best as possible. So the only way to make that parking lot on North meet the requirements is to eliminate a row of parking, because it can't be any narrower than what it is now and have parking on both sides of the drive aisle. It's already at our minimums as far as parking space size and drive width. So it couldn't be reduced any further to get those extra 2 feet on both sides. So it is as small as it could get and still make sure we met the parking requirements. Similarly, the street trees along the street, the reason there's room there now if they would just do a standard 5-foot sidewalk, which is what's required, but because the city, this is the Big Four crossing trail route, it goes from 5 to 10 feet, which limits 8 feet of grass that would be between the sidewalk and the street. So when you get down to 3 feet, any landscape architect tell you those trees either aren't going to survive or they're going to bust up the sidewalk over time, just because there's just not enough room for a tree to grow. So that variance was necessitated by the city's requirement for that to be the Big Four trail route. So in this case, that request is fairly straightforward. The setbacks and landscaping requirements on that parking lot to the north are primarily due to the fact that it was more important to meet the parking space requirement than to meet that setback.
Do the financials not work if it's a two-story building?
The financials are already very close to, are already pretty tight.
Thinking with fewer units, you need fewer parking spaces, maybe you can meet the requirements. But thank you.
Anything else for Ben? Thank you, sir. Any questions or concerns amongst the board? Okay, I would entertain a motion for this property for the two variances.
Three.
Three variances, I'm sorry.
We're treating this as one parcel, correct?
As one parcel? Okay, just this one.
Hey, Ben, just
I'm sorry.
to clear something up.
Yeah.
This is multiple parcels that we're going to be, there's 5 that are going to be reduced down to 3, but the variances cover all of the, it's a collective request.
The legal description associated with the variance request is associated with all 5 of
It's
the
a
properties.
single entity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
But they're not contiguous, correct?
No, all 5 are not contiguous.
Okay. Okay, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion for docket 1831, recommend approval of the development standard variance requested for the landscaping, the parking area setbacks, and parking lot perimeter landscaping.
Second?
I would second.
Okay, Kelly, would you take roll, please?
Gordon Perry,
Aye.
Bruce Polly,
Aye.
Ron Edwards,
Aye.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Okay, passed 5-0. Congratulations. Good luck.
This is probably after the fact. And do we need to, this parking issue that we were talking about for, everybody seems to know the gentleman that spoke. I'm sorry, I don't know you personally.
Troy.
Troy, that's gonna, you're gonna follow that up, correct?
Yeah,
That wasn't
I'm
part
going
of
to
the
follow up
motion?
on that. I mean, keep in mind with it, he wasn't requesting a variance for parking spaces, just the setbacks. But yeah, I'll definitely work.
Okay,
With Troy to make sure we get that addressed appropriately.
thank you.
Okay, our next item on the docket is 18-32, Aaron Hunt for Hendricks Commercial Properties LLC. The property is located at 720 South State Road 39, Lebanon, Indiana. It's planned business industrial and comprises of 18.4 acres. This is the first time the requested development standard variance had appeared before the Lebanon Board of Zoning. The subject property currently is vacant, unimproved property located at the corner of Enterprise Drive and State Road 39. Ben,
Thank you,
I'll
sir.
leave it up to you.
I'll give you a little bit of a background on this site and this project. As Mr. Pauly stated, this is about 18 acres. It's right at the northwest corner of Enterprise Drive and State Road 39. It's right to the entrance of the Lebanon Business Park. It's been vacant for a long period of time. It is technically part of the business park, but I think it was owned separately from Duke Construction that's in the business park. The applicant is Hendricks Commercial Properties. They're out of Wisconsin. I believe that's correct if my memory serves me correct, and I'm sure I'll be corrected if that was incorrect. Yeah, they are based out of Wisconsin. Significant size company. They do a number of different types of projects. One of their specialties is industrial. projects. So what they are proposing here is a series of 2 buildings. One of them is about 170,000 square feet, and the other is just a little bit over 100. These are divisible down to smaller tenant spaces, and discussions with the applicant about what we felt was appropriate here. There have been a lot of demand and requests for smaller space for manufacturers and the like, and there is nothing like that product available in this community. What these buildings do is allow us the flexibility to be able to demise them down to smaller spaces for those requests for like 20 to 30,000 square feet. But then the flexibility also, if you get a larger manufacturer that needs 100 to 170,000 square feet, they could take the entire building. So what you see here is a site plan for the site. The 2 buildings sit east to west facing Enterprise Drive, with employee and customer parking south of the building, and then all truck access to the rear of the buildings on the north. You see here that they're proposing 2 drive cuts, which I'll talk about here in a second in a little bit more detail, but there's one on State Road 39 and one on Enterprise Drive. They are providing detention in 2 locations. One's to the south of this west building, and then the other is to the east in this open space here to the east of this building. As we discussed the site with them, there were a couple of challenges. We looked at the site and making everything fit. And so we have a series of variance requests before you tonight that are fairly consistent with other users we're seeing in the business park. They have proposed an overall site plan that we negotiated with them that provides a very attractive project. But there were a couple of things that they wanted to vary from, and those are here before tonight. I'll go find, again, the elevations of the building and give you an idea of what they look like. Here we go. So this gives you an idea what these buildings are going to look like. They're all tilt up with a very prominent entrance where there'd be entrance for those tenant spaces. There's another building just like this up in Beloit, Wisconsin, that I drove past on a vacation. It's a very attractive product, as I noticed as I went past on my way to Minnesota. But this is something that meets all of our requirements for architecture, thoroughfare plan, or in the thoroughfare overlay district, excuse me. But has some flexibility to have multi-tenant or single-tenant spaces, and then flexibility to have truck docks on the rear of the building. You kind of see represented here on the rear of the building. Let me go find the landscape plan. Just to kind of give you an idea overall on the landscape plan, they have requested a couple of variances that associates with the buffer yards. You can see here they have provided a landscape plan that provides all of the required perimeter parking lot landscaping, the trees and shrubs. They meet the thoroughfare overlay district requirement for building base landscaping, 75% of the perimeter, so they've got all that you see here. They meet all the interior parking lot landscaping requirements, as you can see depicted in some of these islands you see here. In fact, this is an old version of the landscape plan. They have provided me with an updated one that has additional plantings than what you see here. Just didn't get it loaded onto the computer in time for the meeting. That's the western building. As you can see, then here on the eastern building, they have fairly significant landscaping out by the entrance on State Road 39 and around the detention facility. And again, you can see the building-based landscaping and parking lot perimeter landscaping provided as required by the overlay. So that is what they have proposed. There are a handful of variance requests that they are requesting for the Board of Zoning Appeals. The first is driveway width. Our UDO requires entrances at the property line to be no wider than 30 feet. There's no necessarily even provision for a 3-lane driveway that you would need to definitely be wider. In the case of this one, they've requested one at 34 feet and one at 40, primarily to the 40-foot driveway would be the one on State Road 39. That is a truck access point. 40 feet is a much more efficient drive width to make sure that there's no conflicts from trucks coming and going from the site, and a little bit safer there, so they have requested for up to 40 feet. The entrance off of Enterprise Drive, they're requesting 34 feet, again, some flexibility in order for customer and employee traffic coming and going from the site. So that's the first one. They've requested relief from our requirement for a maximum of 30 foot on the driveway width. Corridor buffer, there's a couple of them related to corridor buffer. One is associated with State Road 39, as that's part of the thoroughfare overlay district. The standard requires a 20-foot landscape buffer planted with 6 trees and 15 shrubs, and parking lot perimeter landscaping of 3 trees and 10 shrubs for every 100 lineal feet. So that would translate to a 30-foot setback for parking and 9 trees and 25 shrubs every 100 feet, which is a significant amount of landscaping for that kind of space. So what they're essentially doing is doing a little bit of a hybrid. They're meeting the setbacks for the most part along there. There is one spot where they go down to 25 feet as opposed to 30. So they are, other than in one area where they're proposing a potential future drive for more parking as necessary for tenants, it's only 25 feet. They are providing the required setback for both the buffer and the parking lot, but they are essentially combining the landscape requirements and providing more of a parking lot perimeter landscaping requirement rather than the buffer requirement, which still requires substantial plantings, as you can see represented. They've got trees all along State Road 39 as required, and then also the building-based landscaping as required. So again, they're just requesting relief from that buffer requirement to provide essentially a hybrid, a mix of the two to some extent. That would be the second variance request for the quarter buffer in the thoroughfare overlay district. The third is non-residential street buffer. So in addition to our thoroughfare overlays, we also have essentially a blanket requirement for a 20-foot landscape buffer on all non-residential streets. So again, 20-foot landscape buffer requirement plus a 10-foot parking lot perimeter landscape requirement. Fairly substantial setback on all non-residential streets. What they have done here again is a little bit of a hybrid of the two. On the west building, they have I guess I don't have the west building on this. On the west building, they have a significantly larger setback.
Up there, yeah.
Part of the reason is because they have required detention that they're putting out in that area, so they definitely meet the setback requirements of both the buffer and parking lot. They're providing landscaping along the property line around the perimeter of the detention pond, and then they are meeting the parking lot perimeter landscaping requirement along the parking lot perimeter as you see depicted here. On the eastern building, there's a little bit more of a challenge there. Going the wrong way here. In terms of space available. In this case, they have met the parking lot perimeter, both setback and landscaping requirements. So they've got approximately 10 to 15 foot setback. This is too small for me to be able to read what the setbacks are, probably the same for you. And then they've got the parking lot perimeter met. It's still a very substantial landscape package. They're just asking for relief from that non-residential street buffer requirement of the ordinance. The other thing to note here in this location, while the parking is only 10 feet from the property line, Enterprise Drive, the actual edge of pavement, which you see down here, is about 35 feet from the property line, and there's a drainage swale in there, so that's never going to be improved. So effectively, there's almost a 50-foot setback from the edge of Enterprise Drive, while they still only have a 10 to 15-foot setback on their property. That's the third. The fourth is for parking curb. They are proposing to install curb on all parking areas and truck access areas. Let me go back to the original site plan. You can see the whole entire site. There is one location where they're asking to waive the parking curb requirements. Let's see if I'm going the right way here. I don't think I am. Almost there. Here we go. So in this location between the buildings, they're showing some flexibility to be able to add employee parking. And this is all going to be dependent on what the ultimate use is. So our parking requirements, they have met essentially the minimum requirement by ordinance, but our ordinance requirement for industrial manufacturing uses are based on the number of employees as opposed to the square footage of the building. So at this time, these are speculative industrial buildings. We don't know how many employees are going to be in there. So what they've done is they're going to put in the parking to the south of the building, but then they have some flexibility for additional parking to the east here, and then also between the buildings, in case they need more parking when they get their ultimate end users in the building. So what they're asking for is relief from the curb requirement in this drive area in between the two buildings. So if they need the parking for those future users, they have the ability to put it in without tearing out a brand new improvement. So that's the only place. Otherwise, all of the truck access area and all of the customer employee parking areas are all completely curb per ordinance. It's just in this section, in this drive in between the two buildings, we're asking relief for flexibility to add parking as needed. And then the final one is a request that you've seen essentially for every user in the Lebanon Business Park. And this was a trend that was set a long time ago before any of us probably were here. Well, maybe most of us were here. Sidewalks were never required for any development in the business park, and they're requesting the same waiver of the requirement for sidewalks. At this point, there's no property in the business park that has sidewalks, and frankly, with the railroad tracks being just west of here, I don't know that I really want to encourage pedestrian traffic in this area anyway. So they're requesting for a waiver of the sidewalk requirements along both Enterprise and State Road 39. Staff has recommended favorably for each of the 5 variances. The one thing that as I was discussing, we may want to consider as a condition on the parking curbing if they don't end up needing those additional parking spaces, and maybe he can discuss a little bit whether they would install curbing after the fact. If they get tenants, then they would install the curbing. I guess the only challenge there is if the tenants turn over and they've got a new one that needs more parking, then they might still want the flexibility, but just something maybe to discuss with the applicant here in a moment. Otherwise, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, I have a question. Since I've been on the board for probably 15 years, no, not that much, but 10 years anyway. And every time, I don't know how many buildings we've talked about out there in the business park, it's come up for the waiver on the sidewalks. And most of the properties that were with Duke, and you know, the city people before you have said, well, we're working on this and trying to get something worked out with Duke to where we got walk paths or sidewalks.
Sure.
And maybe we'll get have them put money back on each building towards this in the future. And it's gone on and on and on. As I drive around, I see a lot of the big industrial parks that do have sidewalks. But then on this one, as I go to work of a morning it happens about 10 till 6 every morning. I don't know who it is, but there's somebody riding a bicycle. I generally pick them up around Wendy's or where there is no sidewalk. And one morning I saw this individual slip off of the curb and almost got hit. But I guess I'm willing to give a little if we can take a little too, and see if we could get some sidewalks along Lebanon or State Road 39 at this point. Because if we don't do it today, it'll never happen.
Right. And we can certainly investigate that. Certainly State Road 39 is a little different animal since it's a state road, so we'd have to work with NDOT in order to get that done. But we can certainly investigate that. This is going to be an area that's going to have some attention over the next several years for development opportunities. So we certainly will have to take a look at State Road 39, one, to make sure that the road itself is adequate for the development that may happen in the area, but then two, also figure out how we provide access for pedestrians. The biggest question is how do we get people from this area into the rest of town across I-65, which is an even bigger hurdle, but certainly in the area, make sure we have adequate access. So I certainly understand. I don't know all the history on why the first building wasn't required sidewalks in there, and then the kind of a domino effect from there. But maybe if we go back and think about that, maybe that wasn't the best idea. Now we're challenged on the 30th building.
You know, but like I say, if speak now or forever hold your peace type thing, and I guess when the applicant comes up, I'm giving him a little time to think about this while he's sitting back there, but. You know, I guess there's some give and take, and like along Enterprise Boulevard, granted, that'll never go anyplace. But we got to start sometime.
Right.
I think, excuse me, but I think within the last year, there was someone that come before the board that said they were checking on putting some kind of like a golf cart path or something out in that area. But they didn't say anything about sidewalks. But
I'd have to look into that. I'm not sure who that would have been.
I think within the last year.
Okay. The other thing to keep in mind, I didn't mention this, or at least I mentioned it and didn't highlight in this case, within the right-of-way of Enterprise Drive, there is an open ditch. So there's some limitations on where you could even put a sidewalk in the right-of-way for Enterprise Drive. So I mean, we could take a closer look at that to see if it physically is even possible. But there is an open ditch that takes up most of that 35 feet that's in the right-of-way right there.
But you said that was on Enterprise, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for Ben?
Ben, what, we have setback lines for every line on a piece of property. And some of that is for utility, but some of these larger setbacks, what are we doing with it? What are we doing with that land? I should know this, but I don't. So I want to know what we're reserving this land for.
Right. So, like I said, in some of these cases, there are utilities. So there's an easement associated with that that's separate. In the case of the buffer requirements and the parking setback, it's specifically for landscaping. So we only have a handful of sites that have actually met both the buffer and perimeter landscaping requirement because it's extensive what's required. We found that in most cases, if we can kind of come up with a hybrid of the setbacks and the planting requirements, come with an attractive plan, that we can get a better product that way than just trying to stuff a bunch of trees and shrubs out there in a line to meet the requirement. So in the case of those setbacks, it's reserved for landscaping and to create a larger setback off the road. In some cases, maybe that makes sense. In other cases, maybe it doesn't, which is why some of them end up here.
Okay, so building a sidewalk in this dedicated space, setting stuff back and keeping things uniform and attractive in that, are we looking at sidewalks as different, as infrastructure in some way that prohibits it from being in this setback area?
So it is typically a public infrastructure component that we would prefer located in the right-of-way so we can maintain it as necessary. So you place it on private property, then it becomes a responsibility of that private property owner to maintain.
Okay.
But general practice is that sidewalks are in the right-of-way.
Okay. Other questions for you. 39, the driveway cut that they want to put in on 39, is that driven by us or is that driven by NDOT? Because it's their right of way.
The location versus size or what?
Just the idea of granting access.
That's something that's got, I mean, in terms of it being approved or not, ultimately is going to be NDOT. There is a drive in that general area already, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have the exact location, I have the survey. But in terms of the actual location, width, et cetera, we can approve it locally based on what our UDO requires, but they will have to go to NDOT and get a permit and approve that location.
Okay. And the increase in size in the driveways, that's driven by truck turning radiuses and all that good stuff?
Yeah, when you start taking a look at, as trucks are making turns in and out of sites and just make sure you don't have any conflict, this is very similar to the request that was made for, the name just escaped me, U.S. Cold Storage, where they were looking at how to get trucks in and out. They made the same request for a 40-foot drive aisle just to make sure that they're eliminating as much as possible any conflicts and making sure that those trucks, in order to avoid other trucks, aren't turning through the grass and tearing everything up outside of that. So it is primarily driven by the need to make sure that those trucks can get in and out of the site without causing any conflicts or tearing up any curbs, in this case, because it'll be curbed, or any of the landscape areas.
Okay. On the additional parking between the buildings, they don't want to put in curbs. I understand that. So curbing would stop at approximately the curb returns, and then it'd just be the pavement edge, whatever the width is.
I'll let Mr. Hurt explain that but yeah, that's my understanding, is that it's just that drive aisle between the two buildings where there wouldn't be curb.
Okay, so we could define a spot where curbing is going to start and stop.
Yes.
Okay. Does that hold true on the east side of the east building where I see all these dashed lines? Is that whole thing, is that part of the flexible, hey, if they need more spaces, we could put that in?
Yes, yes.
That's not part of what we're looking at tonight. That would be a future, where your cursor is, that's a future option.
Yeah, right now that'll be turf. It could theoretically, depend on tenant needs, be installed as necessary, but that again would meet all the applicable standards. They're not requesting any variances associated with that additional.
So they're on the south side where the curb returns are, where you're going to start into that dash line. We would curb up to that point and then just leave the drive lane open as flat pavement. And it would be flat pavement up on the north side, or are we going to put those curb returns in?
I'll let Mr. Hurd, again, this is small, so small that I can't really tell at this, this size. I'll let him confirm that for us. My scale is not appropriate to be able to tell where that double line stops and starts. There is a double line there along all those, I just can't see it at this scale.
Okay.
Any other questions for Ben?
I'm good, thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Yep.
Would the applicant care to come forward, please? State your name and address for the record.
Good evening. I'm Aaron Hurt with Civil and Environmental Consultants. We're the engineer for Hendricks Commercial Properties. Our address is 530 East Ohio Street in Indianapolis, 46204. I do have a colored version of the site plan in front of me here.
Can we put that on the table, Ben?
I actually have hard copies too. Would you like that? I can hand those out to you. Yeah.
It's up, Ben.
Lay it on the table.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir?
Oh, I don't need one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kill 3 trees.
Excuse me.
Okay. Yeah, I think Ben did a really good job kind of giving an overview, but I'll just kind of hit some of the fine points there. In terms of the curbing, in terms of the straight sections,
Wait a minute, they'll bring you the hand mic.
Sorry.
Gotta find one that works first.
Great difficulties.
okay.
Test 1, 2.
Drop.
Yeah, in terms of the question on the curbing, yeah, our thought process here was in the straight segments to not install the curb to give flexibility for the future parking. Just because the tenants they're talking to, they'll probably start the construction on this building without knowing all of the tenants, so that just gives more flexibility on the construction. I think once that's set and they're confident with the tenants, I think they have no problem providing curbing. I think that's fine. This was just intended to give more flexibility. In regards to the question of curbing at the end of the parking lot and in this section, I think the thought would be to go ahead and curb those sections because this is intended to be a future drive that they're not thinking they will need initially, so they would probably prefer just to go ahead and curb those sections, but primarily leaving out the section here until the tenants are known. So that's the question on curbing. In terms of the sidewalk question, I think Ben touched on it along Enterprise Boulevard. There's a pretty substantial ditch here in this segment, and there's actually an existing detention pond here in the green space that we're expanding, and that picks up drainage from the roadway, and there's a pretty significant side slope here. So it would be very difficult to install sidewalks along Enterprise Boulevard at this point, given the drainage infrastructure that's already in place. On State Road 39, we have met with NDOT regarding the curb cut. And in general, they're in favor of the curb cut. We just have to finalize the permitting process with them on that. In terms of the sidewalk, I think NDOT is kind of looking at this corridor comprehensively. And so if you go further northwest to the Donaldson's Chocolate Company and then the ConAgra and the truck stop, the asphalt kind of blends right into the roadway. So there really isn't a good spot there in front of those locations to provide sidewalks, or there currently is no sidewalk, and it's not very congruent in that northern section. I think we do have green space, probably about 10 to 20 feet where a sidewalk could be constructed in the future as part of NDOT's plan. So maybe they could make a commitment, or our client Hendricks could make a commitment to provide, you know, a path for a future sidewalk once NDOT has a more comprehensive plan. That could be a possibility we work through with staff. I think Ben touched on a lot of the setback questions in terms of the setback here, and I think we have a pinch point here on the corner in terms of the setback. We believe we can provide all of the required landscaping plantings in that area without the additional ground. And giving the, you know, this property is not a rectangle, it does angle, and so while we're pinched here, we provide significant green space as the angle increases. So it's more of a site-specific requirement on these setbacks, and we are willing to meet the landscaping ordinance in terms of plantings, number of plantings. We have no problem with that. I guess with that being said, I'm happy to answer any additional questions. You know, Hendricks would like to start construction this fall. They want to get things going, so they're very eager to move on the project and excited about working with Lebanon. I think they appreciate Ben's support and the mayor's support working through this process. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Any questions for the applicant?
I have a question on fencing. Are you going to have any fencing around the perimeter or between the buildings, or?
Yeah, currently we do not have any fencing proposed. I think that would be a tenant by tenant basis. So if a tenant were to come in and want some fencing, that could be open for discussion. Currently there is not planned to provide any fencing. You know, there could be a possible scenario to need some fencing in the back, but currently I think we're just trying to meet that with landscaping. So no fencing at this time.
Do you have this rented?
They're talking to several tenants at the moment, but Hendricks would build this speculatively to start with.
But at this time, we don't know if they would require security fencing.
Right, that is right. We do not know that yet. Yep. So.
Any other questions? Okay, I got one then. In looking at the sidewalk again, it says the UDO requires street to include 5-foot sidewalk on both side streets in the industrial district. The applicant is requesting the relief, I understand that. Would the sidewalk, I guess I'm kind of willing to give up Enterprise sidewalk, but along 39, is there any state regulations or anything that would hinder or putting sidewalk on 39?
Well, the one thing we'd have to look at with them, and it's maybe a little hard to see on this site plan, is the existing right-of-way on State Road 39 is not particularly wide. You can kind of see, so here's the right-of-way line, and what you see right there is actually the edge of pavement. So you're really only, you're probably 10 feet or less from the edge of pavement before you get to the right-of-way line. So you're, again, going back to Mr. Hurt's comment about whether, my guess is if NDOT's coming through here and is going to make improvements, install sidewalks, they're probably going to be requesting additional right-of-way from this property in order to make it work, because it's real tight right now, and probably not particularly safe to install sidewalk in the space that's available. So there's some longer conversations that probably need to be had with NDOT about whether they would even permit a sidewalk on this road right now, or if it's something that's going to have to be in the future as NDOT's looking to make some improvements in this area.
Would they allow sidewalks on 39 that far out? Just one sidewalk?
We'd have to discuss with
in
them.
town though.
Well, it is now, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but
Yeah,
Well, isn't it part of a bigger question to connect that, to connect that up to 65, to get that, not just
right
weeds and just a mess.
Yeah.
It's a big part of our city, and we're not connected to it other than through vehicle traffic.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think we're definitely gonna have to work through, again, with NDOT to see whether physically there's even the room and whether they permit it. But we can certainly investigate that with them. I don't think, other than the physical limitations, I don't know that the applicant has any heartburn about installing them. If we can figure it out with NDOT, Mr. Hurt maybe can address that, but there's certainly a larger discussion that needs to happen with NDOT about if and how that even gets done.
Part of that discussion, Ben, can that be to find out what NDOT's plans are for 39? Because at some point, I would think that we would have to, I was through here over the weekend looking at this, and so of course the main entrance to the park is off of 32, but there's a whole lot of traffic that exits out of the south side and dumps out onto 39.
Right.
So I'm wondering if NDOT has is there enough volume to say, we need to make improvements to 39 to handle that additional traffic? And if so, they don't have enough, they certainly don't have enough room as it is right now to make any type of width improvements.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that they have any current plans on the books for this segment of State Road 39. But I think that, the travel lanes are sufficient. There's a turn lane here, so they've got, the basics of what they might need for the business park. But certainly if they were going to go to 4 lanes out here, then they're looking to find additional right-of-way somewhere. That's going to require a different look. But I'm not aware of any current plans for this segment of State Road 39.
Yeah,
So
I would agree with that. We met with NDOT, and the Crawfordsville District walked them through the plan. They do not have any current plans on the shelf for 39. I think they acknowledge that this is an area that needs study, but they currently do not have any plans.
Could you make a commitment on sidewalk along 39 for your client for a sidewalk on 39?
What I might suggest as an alternative is to approve, if the board so desires, the waiver of the sidewalk on Enterprise, and then we can investigate the possibility with NDOT to see whether it's even feasible. And if NDOT says no, then we'll just need to come back and request that variance at a later date. Hopefully we can get better answer from them fairly quickly and figure that out, but I'd hate for them to commit to the sidewalk and then find out that NDOT says, no way, we don't want a sidewalk on 39.
That's fair, I feel.
I'd agree.
Yeah, I think we'd be okay with that. Yeah, I agree. I don't think we want to commit if NDOT won't approve it, and it, and there's not physical space to provide that. And so we'd like the opportunity to talk with NDOT about that. Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
Ben, I have a question for you on this, on the east, off the east end of the east building, this future overflow parking. Without that, as it's shown here in the plans that we've been given, there's not an issue with the flow for police and fire in front of these buildings not having the ability to turn around?
I was not actually able to be at the TAC meeting where that was discussed. Was the fire department there?
Yeah, the fire department was there. So they did request a temporary drive, so that would be 20 feet wide, which would be around the perimeter of the building. That was more for during construction purposes. Once this is built, there is room to turn around. It's a little deceptive at this scale, but, with the paving in the back, there's 130 feet of paving behind there, so vehicles would have the ability to turn around, fire trucks behind the building.
Behind the buildings, but up on the front side, those are two, and I'm not a fire expert, but I know those trucks are big.
Yeah, they would not be able to turn around.
Right, yeah.
And that's not an issue for?
If it would have come up at TAC, because I've got the notes
Yeah.
from TAC. I did not see that there was any.
Yeah.
It didn't come up.
On the east end, they
It doesn't sound like it
definitely
came up.
wanted the temporary during construction. And our client's willing to do that, that's no problem, so.
I can definitely double check and confirm that with the fire department, though.
Okay.
Questions?
Okay, well, this is a public meeting, and if there's anybody out there that wants to speak, please come forward. Otherwise, you want to speak? Okay, we'll close this portion of the meeting then. Any other questions for anybody? Okay, I would like to divide this up and take our first 5 items, and vote on that, and then address the sidewalk issue. That's okay with everybody?
You want to do 1 through 5, Bruce?
Correct. So I guess I would entertain a motion.
Before you start, Bruce?
Yes.
Where do we put in the TAC item for the up in front? I want that verified. I'd like to see that verified.
If you want that as a condition, we can. This has to go for development plan approval of the plan commission. I'll have to address that prior to that plan commission meeting in a couple of weeks, so.
So it will come up, what you're saying is it will come up again?
Yes, yeah.
And I'll have an opportunity to?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I certainly hope to have it addressed before that meeting. I expect to.
Then I won't. Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, sounds good. Then for docket 18-32, I'd entertain a motion for the first 5 items. Docket.
I would make a motion to approve docket 1832, 1 through 5, and do I want to add something on the TAC or?
No, because that's
Okay.
coming up in planning
1
commission.
through 5.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
I just want to clarify, there's
Wait a minute.
actually 4 items, or maybe a mistake on the numbering.
Yeah.
So just to clarify, rather than saying 1 through 5, that would be the request for driveway width, corridor buffer, non-residential street buffer, and parking curb. So that's, my count is 4, so there may be something incorrect.
Okay, I'm sorry.
On the agenda.
5 should be sidewalk
Yeah.
on the agenda.
Okay.
Gordon Perry,
Aye.
Bruce Pauly,
All right.
Ron Edwards,
Aye.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Now, on the sidewalk issue, I would request a motion. Let's start with that. And then whoever makes it, if they want to add to it, they can.
I'll make a motion that we waive the sidewalk on Enterprise Boulevard and that The client and the city agree to meet with NDOT as far as regarding the sidewalk on State Road 39.
Well said.
Thank you.
I would second.
We got a motion and a second.
Just as a point of clarification, so to meet with NDOT on State Road 39, is there any additional requirements that we want to add to that motion?
I think that, I guess, right now, they're required to put in a sidewalk based on this motion. So if NDOT says that they don't want a sidewalk on there, then they would have to return to the BZA to request relief from that requirement at a later date.
Maybe
Because
meet with NDOT on sidewalk requirements, if possible, on State Road 39.
Because the sidewalk, you're saying, Ben, because the sidewalk would go in the right-of-way and not on private property? Okay.
Yes.
So, yeah, it would be what Lori said.
Got that, Kelly?
Yes.
Good.
Maybe.
I'll work with Kelly to make sure we get that right, too.
Okay.
Poor Kelly.
Did we had a motion. Did we get a second?
Yes.
Okay, we got a motion, and Ronnie
Ronnie
seconded it, and we're ready for a roll call.
Okay. Gordon Perry,
Aye.
Bruce Polly,
Aye.
Ron Edwards,
Aye.
Chad Kiger,
Aye.
Lori Gross.
Aye.
Okay, motion passed, that you'll get with NDOT and see where it goes. Congratulations. I guess, unless there's any other business, we will close this meeting if I get a motion.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Well, we got everybody jumping on that one. Need a second.
Second.
All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay, meeting is adjourned. Next meeting is
September 4th.
the 4th of September.
Which is a Tuesday, correct?
Correct. Thank you.